Well, welcome everyone to our CG webinar with Andre Vieira, and his topic is going to be social origin, skills and graduates' outcomes in employment in Brazil. Transition from higher education to employment of great interest in every country. So I would expect this will be a webinar which will be viewed often after being given today through the YouTube channel. Now, before I introduce Andre properly, I'm going to take you through the Zoom protocols. Now, remember that the webinar is being recorded and that you'll be able to access it, as I just mentioned, on our YouTube channel through the CG website, which takes you into that same channel. Now, during the webinar, we advise you to keep your sound off. Extraneous noise can interfere with the presentation, and also you don't need to have your camera on until we get to the Q&A stage and you come into the Q&A conversation. At that point, we'd like you to turn your microphone on as well as your camera if you can, of course. During the webinar, we advise you to use the speaker view command and read it at the top right-hand side of the screen. To join the Q&A, we advise you to use the chat function in Zoom. So, to ask the speaker a question, to make a statement, the step you need to go through is to put that information into the chat. Say that this is my question I'm going to ask. What then happens is that I, as the chair of the webinar, then select you into the discussion in a sequence. We set up this double process because we do need to screen the questions or statements to make sure that people are relating to the theme of the webinar. And sometimes people come in to advertise things and so on, which is not very helpful. So we have to do some that one preliminary screening process. And also we arrange the questions in ways in which, we'll facilitate the maximum involvement of everyone. So post your questions in the chat, and when you're invited to speak, and I'll send you a note in the chat beforehand saying we're about to invite you in. When you're invited to speak, you turn on your mic, and if you can, you turn on your camera and you tell us who you are and where you are from, and then you say what you want to say. Now, Andre is an assistant professor at the Department of Sociology and Methodology of Social Sciences at the Fluminense Federal University and an associate researcher at the Research Group on Structuring Inequalities and the Laboratory for Research into Higher Education. So it's employability, but it's about social inequality as well. And I think both those themes together are of great interest to our webinar audience. So Andre, it's over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today and be able to share in some of our research and discuss them with you all, and think about how the Brazilian system of higher education can inform our research on it, can inform decisions in other countries as well, similar or not to Brazil. And so thank you, CGHE, for the invitation. We're excited to share what we have done. So I'm start to share. Let me just one more time. Can you see okay my screen?
That's fine, Andre. We can see everything.
Okay, thank you. So I must start saying that these studies I'm going to present today are part of broader research projects involving at least 3 research groups in Brazil. So I must start by calling them besides the research group on inequalities from the Fluminense Federal University. We have colleagues working on these projects in the laboratory on research in higher education, LAPIS, in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And also at CETES, that's the Center of research and social stratification at the State University of Rio de Janeiro. So it's a collective effort, and we have some colleagues in the audience, and I'm very happy to invite them as well to participate in the discussion and help us debating our findings. So I'm starting to, okay. So these research projects I mentioned are motivated basically by three facts about the Brazilian higher education system. So the first one is that although the system has expanded rapidly in the recent decades, mainly through expanding distance courses and through for-profit private institutions, completing higher education in Brazil continues to be a highly selective and unequal transition. So currently, we have about half, 55% of students who enter college in Brazil drop out before graduating, both in public and private institutions. And this percentage is even higher in the private institutions and science, technology, engineering, and math courses. So I brought this figure to illustrate this. It's from a study from Flávio Carvalhais and Carlos Costa Ribeiro, two of my colleagues in this project, from a paper of 2019, which shows that students from high socioeconomic status are almost twice as likely as the low-income peers to graduate from very high return courses, these bars at the left, and the opposite is true for low return courses. So this is considering data from the universe of institutions and undergraduate courses in Brazil. The second fact is that the participation of graduates in the labor market itself is highly heterogeneous as in Brazil as well, which has consequences, as we know, for different outcomes of interest, such as wages, possibility of career progression, and social esteem or social recognition. Here, another figure to illustrate this. It shows the percentage of graduates among occupational positions in the labor market in Brazil by field of study. The data comes from the 2010 population census. That's the last one published in Brazil. So we can see that, for example, education, humanities, and law, but mostly education and humanities have high percentages of graduates working as civil servants. That's the bar at the column at the left. So we say education, for example, professors and teachers are amongst the most formalized occupations in Brazil. And at the other extreme, we can see medicine and law, for example, with higher percentages of graduates working as self-employed in Brazil, which is a position that, on average, attains higher wages than formal employment. And graduates working as self-employed has advantages, tax advantages in Brazil, for example. We can talk about that later. So we can see that we have a very heterogeneous picture when we look at the occupational positions of graduates in Brazil. And the last factor is that higher education matters for the results of graduates, of course, but in a heterogeneous way, in a very particular way in Brazil, because as I said, higher education system is expanding mostly through distance courses in private institutions, and through opening of courses, low-cost courses in the fields of education, so applied social sciences, for example, business, law as well, are among the areas that are expanding most rapidly in Brazil. So the Ministry of Education, other institutions, civil society are looking into how we can expand the system this way, at the same time keeping the quality of it, and monitoring, for example, graduates' outcomes in the labor market. And there are some efforts towards structuring data about how graduates enter the labor market in Brazil. So here's just another figure to motivate us. We can see hourly earnings in participation in top 10% earnings by fields of study, some selected fields of study in Brazil, compared to upper secondary and other educational levels. So you can see some traditional fields that are among the most traditionally among the most with the highest earnings, such as architecture, engineering, law, health, mostly medicine here, and social sciences and so on. So that's the highest percentage of graduates among the top 10% earnings, for example. So based on these facts and the literature on it, we first seek to describe the transition patterns between higher education and the labor market in Brazil, answering these two first questions. How do distinctive characteristics of higher education training, such as the chosen field and the type of institutions one attends, explain the differences in outcomes among graduates in formal employment? The second, what is the relationship between social disparities that return to a diploma in formal employment and qualitative differences in higher education training? As I said before, we have this very important difference between in-person and distance courses. We have universities, university centers, and faculties in Brazil. Universities being institutions that are that must offer research besides teaching, and faculties, for example, that compose most of the system can only restrict their activities to teaching, for example. So we have these qualitative differences in the system that are very important for our research. And besides describing these transitions, we know, because we know that both graduating in higher education and entering formal employment are processes with a strong amount of selectivity, social and statistical selectivity. We try to take a step forward and estimate causal effects of degrees on graduates' outcomes. So we have these other two questions we seek to answer. So do graduates of different courses have higher or lower wage and occupational returns than they would have had they graduated from another major? Or in other words, does the observed returns result from selectivity bias or from a genuine quote-unquote effect of college education, for example? And the last one, how, if at all, do the returns to undergraduate courses vary? So do we find evidence of negative or positive selection hypothesis? Who benefit most of an undergraduate degree, for example? And I'm going to share some preliminary findings regarding these last two questions. Right? So how we do this, we use basically three data sources. The 2010 population census I mentioned before. ENADE, that's the National Exam of Student Performance. And we selected 3 years, 2009 to 2011, because this exam assesses all undergraduate courses in a 3-year cycle. So every 3 years, all the undergraduate courses are assessed by ENADE, and ENADE evaluates, assesses knowledge in general and career-specific knowledge. For example, it's a standardized test every undergraduate, every graduate needs to apply to answer, and it gathers as well information on social background and academic trajectory from every student. And the annual report of social information, or HICE, as we call it, 2010-2015. It's an administrative record published annually by the Ministry of Education, which provides information on all existing formal employment records in Brazil. including salary, occupation, employment time, type of organization, and so on. So we were able to combine these two data sets using an individual identification. Then we could know the occupational destination of graduates only in formal employment, right? That's a limitation of our data, and currently we cannot access data that brings us information on other occupational positions, such as self-employment, for example. We don't have data available to us in Brazil currently. So the outcomes we exploit, we analyze in these studies are employment, elite occupation, considering professionals, those occupations that require higher education degree, managers, hourly wages, and top 10% earnings. Because of our time, I'm going to bring only a few of them. We use a set of covariates that are conventionally used in these studies, so demographics, socioeconomic, information about age at graduation, region, if students move to study, and as I said, the scores in the ENADE tests relating to knowledge, career-specific knowledge, and general knowledge, such as reading, being able to analyze complex arguments, and so on. And we use, to first describe the patterns of transition, we use linear and logistic regression models, looking, for example, at employment and wages that are the results I'm going to present. And also an augmented and inverse probability weighted regression that seeks to overcome the problem I mentioned of differential selection into treatment. We can talk about that later. So we were able to estimate causal effects, controlling for the selection process at the end of the higher education, in that case. So the first outcome I bring is about the first two questions I mentioned. So this figure represents the predicted probability of being formally employed by social strata, field of study, and an institutional sector of institution of higher education. So we measured social strata using information about the parents' education. So we separated college students whose parents had college or more and less than high school, and estimated the predicted probability. So we have some important results here. In Brazil, graduates from higher social strata, particularly those from families with higher educational backgrounds, have a lower likelihood of obtaining formal employment in their early careers, sorry. So compared to their counterparts with less educated parents, they are approximately overall, right, 1/3 more likely to obtain formal employment. Less likely. The inclusion of characteristics associated with academic trajectories, such as academic performance in ENADE and work experience, that's another information we can bring from ENADE, does not significantly reduce the impact of social origin on the likelihood of being employed. So these findings suggest, in a counterintuitive way, that the conventional understanding of the formal-informal dichotomy that we use in Brazil may not be applicable to the upper strata of the Brazilian workforce. So, in other words, the privileged students seems to or postpone their entry in the labor market, either by waiting for better options, job options, or to continue investing in their students, proceeding to graduate programs, for example, or entering self-employment or working as employers. There are positions that have higher wages, for example, than formal employment in Brazil. So that's an important finding, because in Brazil, overall formal employment is the most socially protected occupational position in Brazil, and we need to understand better how it works when we are considering higher education graduates. And we observe some variations between fields of study, which are in line with international literature. So the difference in probability of being employed between social strata is greater in the areas of education. As you can see, the first two bars are college, are the upper strata, students whose parents have college or more, and the other two bars are less in high school. So you can see that education, humanities, and social applied social sciences, the differences are greater, which are expected to be more permeable to the effect of social origin. But towards the opposite extreme, we observe that there is little difference in the probability of being formally employed by social origin in law, sciences, and math, engineering, and medicine here at this part of the figure, which indicates that social inequalities persist among graduates transitioning from higher education to the workforce, particularly in areas that are less specific, occupationally specific, such as humanities, for example, or applied social sciences, and whose connection with the labor market is more susceptible to the effects of graduates' socioeconomic background. When we consider this figure represents the probability of being formally employed according to the quartile in career-specific knowledge in ENADE. We see also interesting and somehow counterintuitive results. So we found that high performance in career-specific knowledge correlates with an increased probability of formal employment in diverse fields such as education, law, and health. That's the third bar here. However, high performance is either not significantly associated with formal employment, or is associated with reduced chances of employment, of formal employment, such as we see in engineering, sciences, and math here, and applied social sciences. Particularly for engineering, that's the second one here in the figure, engineering, science, and math graduates, it is plausible that those high-performing graduates refuse available job vacancies or opportunities in Brazil, especially in the context of low economic activity in the sector, such as that of the period analyzed, that's the 2013 to 2015 in Brazil, and prefer to work as self-employed or employers, which, as I said before, enjoy higher average salaries than those in formal employment. So we may have captured these distinct patterns of transition from higher education to labor market according to fields of study. So so that's the first part I brought for our discussion today. And the second one is our exercise to control for non-random selectivity, both into a higher education degree and formal jobs, based on fields of study, institution, and personal characteristics. So we ran this IPW. Let me skip this one because our time. So we ran this inverse probability weighting for our hourly wages and elite occupation. So this first figure presents the average treatment effects of fields of study on logged average hourly wage using IPW corrected and uncorrected models or conventional regressions. So selection in college completion seems to have a very heterogeneous importance with variation in salary returns between college majors. So we see reduction of effect in high return courses, such as, for example, engineering, health, as we saw before, architecture, for example, but virtually no change in median return courses such as, for example, social sciences, journalism, law, and especially those that mobilize cultural skills, and an increase in salary penalty in low return courses, such as education and social service. So we found a substantial reduction in the effect of college majors on wages, as we expected, and the decrease in the effect of college majors on salaries ranges from 2% in business to 34% here in architecture. So let me change to occupation here. We estimate also the treatment effects of field of study, but now on a lead occupation. And once we control for the non-random selection into college completion, we also see a major reduction in the effects of the degree or the chances of achieving an elite occupation. The effect of college majors on the odds ratio of accessing an elite occupation decreases from 7% in social service to a fact of 2.4 in health, right? We also highlighted here the reduction in penalty associated with some areas in the uncorrected regression model, such as personal services, here life sciences, and business, here at the bottom of the figure, 38% in business, for example. So let me go to some conclusions here. So again, we find some evidence that the dichotomy between formal employment and non-traditional forms of employment, such as self-employed, does not seem to apply to the upper strata of the workforce. Those graduates from privileged social backgrounds and with a higher level of skills tend to remain out of the formal job market soon after graduation, which seems to be related to the deteriorating job market conditions for graduates in Brazil, specifically, especially in the period we analyze, right? We need to see now how these patterns behave after 2015, for example. So we find evidence that the effect of simple selectivity on the graduates' outcomes in the labor market varies greatly between fields of study and labor market outcomes, and we believe that this is a major contribution for the current state of literature in Brazil on this topic, mostly because we have access to these very rich data sets that allow us to estimate these effects, but we know that it's a work in progress, so we are adjusting, fixing the models, and evaluating other options as well. And it would be great to hear from you about that. So in general terms, the results indicate that the social origin effect survives even after controlling for the selectivity effect, which points to the possible limits for the equalization effect of the diploma in Brazil, or that of controlling for selection into the college degree holder sample is insufficient. Some methodological and substantive questions remain open. First one, do degree effects persist after controlling for selection of observables, for example? We are evaluating the better limitations of the data sets we are using for this, and how do the effects vary between other institutional dimensions? Here we are considering fields of study in public or private sector, but we are advancing in a more in refining these institutional qualitative dimensions. For example, building measuring types of institutions, right? Combining different characteristics of them. For example, if they are university, faculty, university centers, also sectors, but type of educational delivery, as I said, in person versus distance courses, and so on. So we know that we have a long path in front of us, and it would be great to discuss these findings we are sharing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and lots of good data there. Thank you very much indeed. And we have already a question coming through from Maria Ligia Barbosa. I won't ask my couple of questions first to get the balls rolling. The focus is shifting, I think, in thinking about the relationship between education and the labour market to the unequalising effects of social background after graduation. There was a Brookings study, I think, which last year, which showed that elite graduates, elite graduates from elite institutions were sharply differentiated according to whether they came from poor or affluent social backgrounds. There were people coming through elite institutions in the US who were coming out with inferior labour market outcomes compared to those from more affluent backgrounds, pointing to the fact that a lot happens after graduation. And your data begin to open up that domain as well. I mean, it's very interesting, isn't it, that privileged social background graduates outside the formal job market. So where are they? What are they doing? They don't need education? Question mark. Um, the I suppose the question that entrances me here is what theoretical or conceptual framework can we have which can unify the effects of education and the effects of social background before education and after? What framework, what economic or sociological framework would you use to try and model and measure across both the effects of education and the effects of social background across the whole continuum? So that's my
Okay.
question.
Yeah, thank you. Can I answer that, Simon, or
Of
should
course,
we wait
and
for?
I'll take the questions individually until we get too many,
Okay.
and then we'll pile them up.
Okay, great. Thank you for comments and questions. Yes, that's a big question for us too, because that's, as I said, counterintuitive and unexpected. Because since the formal employment in Brazil is the most protected form of occupational position, we need to understand better what is happening. And this period of time we analyzed, where we got the first 2 years of the last economic recession in Brazil that happens from 2014 to 2016. So that's one question we make is what's happening here, because we don't have, as I said, available national data on that. So we actually don't know where are those privileged graduates, for example, going. We don't know if we cannot measure if they are what are their destinations, right? They're going to continue to study or self-employment. We have some, so we try to go to the literature, international and both international and Brazilian, to better understand if other studies have found that. In Brazil, we didn't find one. So, but we know that in other countries, for example, a study for Reimer and other researchers in 2008, I think, for European Union, found that privileged graduates adopted strategies to postpone their entry into the labor market in scenarios of low economic activities. So that's one possibility, and we are trying to gather some data to test this hypothesis properly. For these studies, we are in a dialogue with literature on both horizontal stratification in higher education and stratification in the labor market. And we are actually we use this data that links higher education to occupational position 3 years after graduation. So I agree with you. We have a lot going on between those two periods, marks, and we are trying to understand this better. But we are basically mobilizing, for example, theories about not only human capital, to think about knowledge and skills, but also how, to what extent, fields of study and basically fields of study are permeable to social origin, the power of the degrees to signalize the signals, power of degrees in the labor market, and so on. So we are mobilizing this literature, and I hope I have answered well. And I'm worried about the time and to give more time to other people.
It's all fine. Thanks, Andre, and that you pointed us towards various things to think about there. Now let's bring in Maria Ligia Barbosa. Maria, are you there, please?
Oh, hello. Thank you. Andre, it was very nice to watch your speak here. And I would just like to insist on a point that we've been studying the impact of institutional models on those trajectories as a way of connecting social origins to social destinies. And it's interesting because the public sector is when we take those when we take those studies like that of André, we can find that public sector, contrary to the expected policies and politicians and ideological views, public sector is dedicated to elite courses and people, and has effects, including the area of education, preparing teachers for job market. It is different people who pass through the public sector and the private sector. So I would like to highlight the connections between the public sector and elite preparation for the job market that should be called more attention.
Great. Thank you, Maria Lígia. Maria Lígia is one of our colleagues working together with us at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And that's, I think it's just a more comment that I just wanted to say that, yes, we are working with these other research projects on how especially public institutions are related to elite formation in Brazil, and advancing, as I said at the presentation, in measuring in a more refined way a typology of higher education institutions in Brazil. So we should have more findings on that soon, and we'll be very happy to share with you later. So thank you again, Marie.
Thanks, Marie. And let's bring in Susan Robertson, who's got a couple of questions.
Yes, two questions. One is your data set largely is, around 2010, some of it up to 2015. So one question is, what's your sense of what's going on at the current moment? Because we've got a different political regime. This is kind of running through quite a turbulent time, fundamentally in Brazil. That's the first question. But my other question really is, I guess, it strikes me as, particularly if we're looking at the wealthy, that we cannot, and Simon's kind of invitation really, we can't actually just think about people remain employed, that the upper elite are fairly likely to be much more globally mobile. And then I'm wondering, are we able to see that in, let's say the UNESCO statistics, where we're able to look at who's moving into which particular countries, and then I don't know, Simon, whether it differentiates between the undergraduate and the graduate, but most definitely the graduate, even the institution I'm in, recruit very heavily the top elite from around the world. That includes, you know, Chile, Brazil, and so on. And so that's the limitations really of a kind of a type of methodological nationalism, that our explanations get drawn into that because that's where the data looks. But actually in a much more kind of mobile, at least for the upper elite. And then I'm thinking Stephen Ball's work, he was talking about schools, of course, but he's talking about circuits of schooling. And I'm thinking there's a parallel story there around circuits of higher education, and the elites are actually moving in very different kinds of circuits, potentially globally or even regionally, to those with rather different kinds of profiles. So that's just a question and a reflection.
That's great, Susan. Thank you. Yes, we are working. I'm working on this another project with a colleague, Alice Lopes from Edinburgh, and we are trying to get access to data about international mobility in Brazil, but that it's not publicly available, and we need to apply. That's how complex documentation to be able to access that. But that's for sure a possibility, and we just don't have the data for measuring it. It's just a hypothesis for now. And regarding the period of time from 2010 to 2015 and what happened or has been the case since then, during the pandemics, and looks like we have not recovered fully from that. The percentage of graduates going to self-employment exploded in Brazil. So it reaches the highest percentages since the beginning of the series, at least since the early 2000s. So, and we have, but it's we don't have because this kind of connection between information about careers and institutions are not publicly available. We don't have until now studies on that, but we have some for now only anecdotal evidence on that. But overall, we know that graduates are going to self-employment, especially, but formally self-employment, formal self-employment in higher percentages. But yeah, a lot of questions remain open on that. But for example, how it varies among fields of study. We know that, for example, engineers in Brazil have found engineers or science fields have found difficulties to get into formal employment in Brazil. So some areas suffer from more adverse conditions, and this has not changed basically in the last 5 or even 10 years. So we have some hypotheses on that some fields of study, especially in the hard sciences, have found, and occupationally specific as well, have suffered from that. But that's only for now some hypotheses.
Can I just follow up? Simon's just invited me for a quick follow-up, and I listened yesterday to a paper that came out on a comparison between the millennials and the baby boomers. And what's very interesting is what they're looking at is US-based data, and they can see a decline in some of the kind of professional areas. Now, that's the kind of thing also that Hugh Lauder and Phil Brown were flagging probably about a good 10 years ago, is that a number of occupational areas have actually become part of the global supply chain, and these are professional areas, you know. So very well educated Indians who can do legal work, health, read health data, that kind of stuff, overnight get it back, that kind of thing. So the other element that might be quite important is thinking about what's going on in the professions, some bits of the professions that are becoming much more tied into kind of global the redistribution of the global labour market. And I think those insights of Phil and Hugh way back then, when there's a cost quality kind of, it's much cheaper to do some of this work. We see that also in the publishing industry. You get good quality, much cheaper, and those who are doing it in these distant locations, professional work actually, are actually relative to their own population getting quite well paid. So again, the global part of that story, I think, is quite important. And that's just a kind of reflection, Simon. I'll just leave it there.
Let's bring in our next question, and I will give you a spot at the end, Andre, so you can sum up. But let's bring in our next question, which is from Golo Hinseki.
Hi, Andre. Good to see you. Great to listen to your talk. And my question really ties in with all the others that have been raised. Is more or less, if I understand your results, especially when you control for selectivity, right? What we see is like the shrinking in this wage differentials and shrink and overall decline in the heterogeneity of who gets into the top jobs. So inequality happens. The processes to generate inequality, they happen then sort of either before higher education or after higher education, more or less. So higher education is like neither helping these processes, nor does it do much to nor does it do much to enhance them. But so in the system, where's your sense where those inequalities come in? Or am I mistaken and misread your results?
Oh, sorry, I was muted. No, good to see you too, Golo, again. No, you're absolutely right. The thing is, yeah, prior to higher education for sure, and we have in Brazil a huge problem in, for example, high school. Let's start with that. We have a very high percentage of students in public schools that are not complete high school in Brazil. So we have a very high selectivity, both at the completion of high school in Brazil and at the entry of higher education. So although in the last decade, for example, the law of quotas in the federal institutions of higher education have tried to tackle this issue of high inequality in entering in higher education. We still need to improve in a lot of ways the set of public policies developed in the last decade to tackle inequality of opportunities in higher education. So that's one dimension. We have a very selective process of entering in higher education, and we have also this because we are looking only into those who complete higher education. As I said, we have very high dropout rates also along in the higher education system. So that's one dimension the literature in Brazil needs to understand better, because we have some issues, some challenges to measure dropout in Brazil, and who drops out, even if it's really dropping out, or students are only changing courses or institutions. So that's some aspects, I would say, helps to explain the process we are capturing. But we need to think better about how it relates to social inequalities before higher education, for sure.
Yeah. Now let's bring in Jorge Delgado. Jorge, are you there, please? There he is.
Hello. Yes, I am. Hello, everybody, and hi, Andre. Nice to meet you. I always love attending these webinars. I really learn a lot, but also I'm really, really worried and interested in higher education at my field. So, and I've been concerned for a long time about the relationship between education and employment at work. So I have this this concern about what is happening right now in the world with so much change in the economic sectors and with all the progress of technologies and the way the world is changing, and also the way education, formal education, is offered or delivered. So I would like to hear about your take about precisely those changes that are taking place in the economic sectors, the modalities of employment, because we've seen in history how at one point the public sector was the main employer. At one point, with reforms in certain trends, we see more private sector being a main source of employment, and now we see a lot of informal, independent, and different ways and how it is related and how it is affected by the major offerings that you see in education, how sometimes they are not regulated, and you see in the market a lot of people in the market with the majors or that are not necessarily easily to find in certain ways of in certain types of employment, and the types of education the students receive. So how precisely you talked about the attrition that we see in all America, but in different parts of the world, students abandoning or not, or deciding not to go to higher education. So I would like to hear a little bit. It's a kind of a complex question, but I think it's a complex topic. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jorge. Great questions. Yes, so let me try. Yeah, in Brazil we have traditionally as you said, so public institutions for graduates go most of in high are more likely to go to public sector to work as civil servants than in those graduates in private sectors. The fact is that my take is, for example, in terms of looking into the education side of the problem, private institutions have been able to address more rapidly the changes in labor market in Brazil. Mainly when you see these big educational groups for profit offering expanding very rapidly in distance courses in Brazil. And they are much more articulated to the labor market, for example, than the public institutions. Public institutions in general, universities, which are mostly research oriented and consider mainly the academic labor market, usually are averse to, for example, adopting technology, mediation and teaching, or for example, changes in curriculum, courses, programs are slower than those processes in the private institutions, for example. So I think in Brazil we have, even in the private sector, a very heterogeneous scenario. So that's a great question to think about how, in the education side, the institutions are responding to these changes in the labor market. Looking at the labor market side, yeah, we see that that we have changes happening mainly in the field. My impression is in the field of, for example, science, hard sciences, and technology, and all that, following trends, international trends, right? In Brazil, we have seen that as well. But yeah, I don't know how to what extent the public sector has been responding to these changes or thinking about. I know that a lot of virtualization and automatization is going on, and skills requirements changing alongside. But I think that's a topic we need to understand better. And I know that, for example, in terms of skills, Golo has looked a lot into this question, how the higher education system is following requirement skills changes in the labor market. And I think in Brazil we have a lot to do in that direction. So that's a complex question. I try to get it all. I hope I succeed. Thank you.
Well, look, thanks very much, Andre. And that was a really good seminar. And I think, as I said before, repay continued viewing, repeated viewing. The data are great. It's good to break open such an important country as Brazil and to see it laid out for us like that. It's very helpful indeed. We're interested in your work to come back onto the webinars. I want to thank Golo Hanseki, who helped bring Andre to us today. And Golo has also helped bring to us our next webinar, which is by Sengwu Lee, and it's called Job Quality Premium Trend Changes in Job Quality in South Korea. So go to East Asia next. And that's happening on Tuesday. Andre, is there anything else you want to add to what you've already said?
I just want to say thank you very much for the comments, for the invitation again, for the comments. It was great, a pleasure, as I said. And we learned a lot and are bringing a lot of suggestions to improve our work and projects ahead. So thank you again.
My abiding feeling that I get from this, and also from the work on in the UK on the relationship between the global labour market and education, is that education's in causal potency terms not as important as it has been sold to be by Gary Becker and many ministers of education and many university leaders and others. Education's causal potency needs to be somewhat diminished in social science, and its relational aspects, its interconnections with all the other causal factors need to be better understood. But we have tended in the practice of education to treat it like it's sui generis and has a unique propelling power to change society, to create equality, and to create wealth. Andre, you've helped us see it in this more complex way, and that's what we all need to do. So thank you very much. And let me thank everyone for their participation, excellent questions and discussion. And we look forward to seeing you all for more on higher education and the labour market next Tuesday. Bye for now.